Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're joined by a special guest. You know them, you love them. Today we've got Ray.
Yay! Hey, Ray. How you doing, buddy?
Hey there, it's good to be here.
Oh my gosh. Well, look, listeners, you can't see him, but Ray is looking real adorbs. Ray has... How did you describe him? You're the emotional support human to...
I have a cat. He's not my emotional support cat. I'm his emotional support human. And I like to say he's just like his daddy. He big and chunky. Yeah, so we're both here. We're here, we're queer. We're ready to go.
So, Ray, you messaged to speak on
gender. This is my thing. I identify as a trans man, and so this is something that I think is maybe a bit lacking in our community a little bit. Just the discussion of what it means to be trans, what it means to have a different gender identity, how that informs how we see our bodies, how other people see our bodies, how weight gain affects us in different ways, how society sees us in weight gain. Like, there's a lot that kind of falls into it. So I am an advocate for trans rights and for trans youth in particular. And so this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So when I saw that there wasn't anything yet, I thought, I sincerely doubt that these guys are transphobic. Maybe they just haven't had somebody who is able to talk to them yet. So that's why I reached out, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be able to talk to you guys. So thank you again for having me.
You're welcome, and that's precisely correct. We just hadn't had anyone approach us yet. Neither James nor I have ever had any issues with talking about the topic. We just didn't really know a whole lot of people that were both trans and in the gainer community.
So, Ray, I'm curious. Did you first discover your transness or your connection to the gainer community, or did they come hand in hand?
So for me, I knew I was trans before I even knew what gaining was. I always knew, and you can ask a few people, different people who identify as gender non-conforming or anything that's not cisgender, that they kind of realize something might be off as you were growing up. I knew for me that when I was about 5 or 6, I think I distinctly remember saying to my mom, I want to be a boy. Like, you can't really get any more clear than that, especially for a 6-year-old. I don't think, and yet here I am. I waited until, 2017 to finally start doing things. That's when I started socially transitioning. I started medically transitioning in 2018, and I didn't discover the gaining community until partway through 2020. And that was just, kind of in the same way that some of us do. We start out as lurkers. We're just kind of peering, and then slowly we're like, okay, maybe I can dip my toes in a little more. And then slowly, before I know it, it's like, oh, I didn't even mean to, and now here I am. I have accidentally seem to have put on 40 pounds. Okay.
Oh no! How absolutely, how awful! Look at you. I mean,
it's so funny how that whole thing works out. It's almost like there's a part of your brain that's feigning this discourse in your head, like, gain weight. No, I couldn't. No, well, if you insist.
Like, oh, okay. I suppose if I must.
If you must,
If I
of
must.
course. It's a bit like, what was that? There was an SNL skit, wasn't there, with Kristen Wiig, and it's the whole oh please don't make me sing, and she's like easing away to the piano, and everyone's like, no one's asking you to sing. She's like, oh no, I mean it, please don't make me sing. I'm not prepared. But the people, they want me to sing. I have to sing. I'd be a terrible hostess if I didn't sing. Oh gosh.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's very that vibe, I think, for a lot of people. When you first dip your toes into it, it's like oh, I'm trying to think of a good example. There's just this suction that happens, and all you've stuck in is a little toe, a little pinky toe. But there's enough suction that somehow your foot goes in, then your legs in, and then before you know it, you've just fallen in face first, and you're floundering around in the waters of weight gain. And by the time you resurface, 50 to 100 pounds have gone by, and you just go, oh, well then.
By the time you resurface, you're just a full-fledged whale at that point, and it's like, well, I guess I belong here.
I've clawed my way out of the swamp of weight gain.
By that point, it's not even about gender transformation. It's just a full species transformation. It's like at that point, there's not even gender to consider. There's what do you call those teeth that whales have? They filter through krill. You got those going on. There's a blowhole. There's like a humpback and a tail, and there's a lot of like
all the blubber,
all
of it,
exactly.
all of it.
Exactly. So this is the secret truth, isn't it, of the whole trans narrative? Gender is stage one, and then full-fledged species transformation into whales. That's the secret of gender, isn't it? We're outing you here on the podcast.
I'll be the first one to say that, gender constructs, they can be really dumb. So there are times when it's like, I see jokes and memes on the internet of like, how do you identify? Male, female, other, do not care. And sometimes I'm just like, I honestly don't care. I am human, I think. Half the time I feel like some sort of like weird, like amorphous thing that's floating through the cosmos. So fuck if I know.
You're not alone. You're not alone. I mean, like I may not have had the experience of grappling with that, because it just didn't happen for me. Like I'm okay with the gender that I was assigned at birth. So I can't identify, but I can certainly imagine how difficult that must be to grapple with, especially at a young age. And then when puberty happens and you see that things aren't going the way you wanted them to go, I can just imagine how soul crushing that must be.
Yeah, it's an experience, and there's a lot of different ways that there's one trans advocate that I really like. Her name is Paula Stone Williams, and she actually was the head of a Christian network for a while, and then she came out and they all just said, oh, we don't need you anymore, we're gonna let you go. But she kind of said something that like, when I was growing up, it's not that I hated being it's not that I hated being a boy, I just knew I wasn't one. And that's how I felt. I was good at being a girl. I think I did that pretty well. I just didn't know, I just knew it wasn't for me. And what Paula also says is, she said, I wished that one day the gender fairy would come and wave their wand, and then I would just wake up what I was. And the gender fairy never came. And it was about as saddening as learning that Santa did not come and put presents under the tree, but rather it was my parents trying to do it quietly while drinking their whiskey.
And I actually love what you just said, and it's not that I want to try to equate gender and weight gain on the same level, but like how you said you wish that the gender fairy would just come and wave a wand, and like there are so many gainers that would love for the fat fairy to come along and just wave the wand, and all of a sudden we wake up in the body that we want to be in. I mean, there's a commonality there,
Yeah.
But I suppose similar in that regard as well is, as much as it would be lovely for that fairy to come along and magically make it all happen for you, it's not going to. You need to get to a point of understanding that this is your lived reality and no one's going to make it happen for you but you. So I want to ask, transness in general, I think people are starting to get a bit more of an understanding of, just as that conversation happens more in the wider world. But what has your experience been like as a trans person in the gainer community? And if you came out during your time in the community, has that experience shifted?
Well, like I said, I was already out before I had found this community. And even now that I am not just lurking, but I'm in the pool swimming around with everybody as some sort of, whale in training, maybe, I don't know. I sometimes, not gonna lie, sometimes I feel like a bit of an outsider or an interloper. I don't always feel completely integrated. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily just because of my gender identity. I am relatively new and unknown. I used to have a Grommr. I don't have one right now. I'm only on Instagram. I'm not a very popular person. I don't have a ton of views or anything, but I like being where I am. And I like being in the community and making friends. And so far, the friends that I have made are like you guys, but I haven't had a ton of people reaching out and wanting to engage in friendly dialogue. And I know for a fact I am not the only transmasculine guy in this community. I can think of a handful of guys, Sock Boy Seth, if you guys know who he is. There's also Chubby Bear Trans Man. Both of those guys I think are awesome. But, when I think about who we envision, I think about, who we might see in the art or in different fiction stories. We don't see trans people.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it is too in the general world. Like, I've never seen a Warren Davis story with a trans man.
Yeah.
I don't know if I will. And so it's not that I don't necessarily feel welcomed at times, because, I'm here and I'm very grateful to have the chance to talk with y'all. But it's just that there aren't a lot of times where I feel like there are other people that look like me.
Mm.
And look, that makes perfect sense as well. To listeners, there is a fantastic documentary on Netflix that I would suggest, which I believe is called Disclosure.
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
a brilliant dive into the way that the trans experience has been presented through the media, and really holds the media accountable for the way in which trans people are seen and viewed. So an example is, the movie Ace Ventura, which, great movie, a lot of people love it. Jim Carrey comedy is usually pretty on point. But in the first movie in particular, there was this sort of gross moment where at the end, the villain, who is a woman, is revealed to be trans and still has their genitalia, and that is used as the joke. That is then used for men to be vomiting and all these other horrible, horrible things. And part of the reason to mention this documentary Disclosure is to realize, when you look at the scope of how often trans representation is used as that, a vomit-inducing butt of the joke, you can begin to understand why, as part of mainstream culture, it's just not seen in a positive way, and why we need to do a lot of work to really get to a point where we can understand transness as a very important and very valid thing. Let's ask one of those questions that are stupid and basic, but for the sake of putting a definitive answer out there, is the goal of transness to eventually look like a passing cisgendered man or woman? The answer is
no.
But why, Ray? Why?
The goal of being trans is not to look like anyone in particular. Your goal of being trans is to feel good in your body and to feel like what you're feeling inside is congruent with what you look like on the outside. You know, I might touch on this a little bit later, but you know, there's a lot of different ways in which gender and sexuality are manifested. We have our identity, which is up here in our head, you know, in our souls, you know, wherever, how we feel that. And then our gender expression, which is how we physically will look. I know plenty of people with whom those do not look the same. You know, we have, I am a transmasculine guy and I dress masculine. And that's how I feel comfortable. But there are plenty of other people who, you know, even cisgender people who don't look that way. Let's think, great example, Billy Porter. He is a cisgender gay man, but he has worn dresses. Right?
Yeah.
And then we can think about so many different people today. We can see cisgender women, and, you know, we think about the time when before, you know, pants were allowed to be worn, that those were specifically a male article of clothing. You know, we see cisgender women wearing pants all the time. That shouldn't be an issue either. So it's very much a personalized experience.
Yeah.
My perception of masculinity may not fit yours, but it doesn't mean it's any less valid.
Right.
I find that really fascinating, like that comment you meant about, you know, before women were allowed to wear pants, because like I'm an aficionado of like old films, and I remember like old sex symbols from the 30s, like Marlene Dietrich. And she was made a sex symbol because she wore men's clothes, because she would put on a suit and a top hat and serenade a woman. And even like I can't remember which movie it is, but in one movie she kisses a woman right on the lips, you know. And like this was so scandalous for the 1930s. Like, oh, she's dressed like a man and she's acting like a man, and we don't know what to do with this, you know. But
Right.
she's German, so of course she's from Europe, so that's why she's weird. Like, you know, it's like the foreign movie stars they gave all this leeway to, because like, oh, they're from Sweden, they're from France, they're from Germany, they're not like us, you know. But I find that really interesting how something as simple as putting on an article of clothing that is considered opposite of what the person is supposed to be wearing can either propel you into this weird place where you become like a sexual fantasy, or you become a complete social pariah.
Oh, fully.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me then want to ask, when it comes to the trans experience, of course, there are a lot of folks who express the view that transness isn't real. But we as gayners also have the experience of our desires being invalidated as well. If you could speak to cisgendered gayners for a moment about your experience, what would you want them to know? Just first thing.
Sure. Well, you know, to kind of piggyback a little bit on what we were talking earlier about gender presentation and identity, you can be trans and not medically transition. You know, you can have surgery, you don't have to. You can have hormone therapy, you don't have to. It is not a requirement that you need to do this in order to be trans. So we can have plenty of people who will never go through any sort of medical anything and still identify as male. I have been medically transitioning since 2018. So I have been using testosterone for that length of time. Now, the way I try to explain it is that I am using testosterone to fight against my biologically female body to appear as male as possible. If I were to stop taking testosterone, my body wants to naturally revert back. There will be some things that can't change, like my voice will stay as deep and my hair will kind of stay here, but you know, my body fat will go back to where it wants to be. You know, my skin will change again. You know, the nerve sensitivities will change, things like that. And, you know, that also comes through, you know, muscle muscle mass also. So we have that on top of everybody's genetics, which also impact the way that they gain weight. So, if you think about it, I am going through a few extra hoops, I think, to try to make gaining weight work for me. Because while some people are like, if I'm fat everywhere, I'm happy about it. But I know for me, if I got fat in certain areas, that's just going to make me feel awful. Some people, like, I'm sure that some of you guys would be like, oh, I love the fact of having boobs. If that happened to me, I would cry.
Yeah. And
I can understand that.
This is part of that whole larger conversation because, of course, even just within cisgendered conversation on weight gain dynamics, I mean, hello, how many conversation points about people being like, I want a rounded belly. Oh, I'm jealous of guys who can grow moves. I'm jealous of guys who've got these dumpy dump truck asses, And it's like, even outside of gender, what we're really saying is it is kind of gendered. We are kind of making these inferences of we want to look more masculine or even feminine might be the preference of some guys, So a sort of shyness to the idea of gender transitioning really kind of isolates us in this moment of, oh, well, you can only have what is presumed to be okay to have, which is ridiculous because what we're ultimately saying is we want to take the body that we've got and change it into the body that we want. And yet we're still trying to gatekeep. We're still trying to say, yeah, you'd be hotter if the moobs weren't as big. You'd be hotter if the belly was a different shape. And that's fucking wild to me because, obviously there's always posts where people are like, have more nuts and avocado if you want a heavier belly. And it's like, girl, look, I'm going to put this out there. There is actually no consistent scientific evidence that says any one food item is going to make your body do one thing or another. That is literally half the point of muscle gaining, to be quite clear, right? Is to exercise a part of your body to emphasize that part of your body. That's the only way you're going to get the thing that you're going to want to have. And it's going to be muscle, not fat. Everything else you get, genetics, luck of the draw. And you've got to be willing to be on board with it because it's like a Kinder Surprise. You don't know what the fuck you're going to get. You need to be willing to be like, shit, this is my fat body. I fucking love it. But of course, there is that thing for trans people. And I think that's a question very much worth asking. So you've alluded to it so far, and I think we can kind of get a sense of the answer. But, when it comes to medically transitioning, is there that moment where you either have to put gaining on pause while you take hormones? Are you allowed to continue to grow when you take hormones? Does it benefit the transitioning process? Does it hinder it? Because as you say, there are going to be those moments where if you were to grow a pair of moobs, that's going to be triggering for you. And obviously that's not a positive thing. So with all of that said, what's the reality of the kind of medical thing of that process? Because I imagine there are potentially trans people in our community who haven't transitioned that are nervous to because they're not sure what's going to happen to them and their own sense of gender euphoria and dysphoria as they go on that journey. Can you talk us through that?
Right. Well, for me, I like to think that, gaining weight during transition, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword.
Right.
It can work, it can do wonders. For me, hormone replacement therapy has done a lot to change my outsides to match my insides, but it can only go so far. My voice is only going to get this deep. I'm only going to grow a certain amount of hair. I'm not going to get any taller. My certain body parts are not going to change size. My body fat has redistributed, over the time that I have been taking testosterone, but that also comes with time. That's not something that will happen immediately. There's not as much fat on my legs as there used to be, but there's a substantial amount more on my belly, and that has felt very affirming to me. Because I kind of look at it as like, well, this is if you kind of like were looking at somebody far away and you kind of could see the outline of someone, you could say that looks like a traditional masculine body.
Right.
And I need to emphasize that for me, that's what I want.
Right.
Again, everybody's experience is different. I'll quote Paula Stone Williams again. She says, if you talk to one trans person about the trans experience, you are talking to exactly one trans person about the trans experience.
Right.
So mine is not going to look the same as anyone else's. So, for me, I also ended up getting a lot of hair on my belly also, which also felt so awesome. But there's also some fat on my love handles, and that doesn't feel so great to me. But I try to focus on the positive things that came from it.
Right.
Like I don't have like the way that the fat has shaped. I don't have an hourglass anymore, and that is something that is more traditionally associated with a female feminine body.
Right.
And for me, that's, that feels good. But you kind of, and I know that we're kind of, this is something that I'll be repeating a lot too, is that, there are, and like for trans folks, for even cisgender folks, I won't ever look like other gainers because only they can look like them.
Right.
This is the only body I have. I can't swap it out for anything. I can only look like me. And I need to remember, and I need to always remind myself this, because I still struggle with that, with feelings of dysmorphia and dysphoria, that my body is just as valid as everyone else's, regardless of where the fat is, regardless of how much there is.
Mm-hmm.
It's still just as valid and is still just as manly as a cisgender man's.
I fucking love that. And, I think this is truly a lesson that cisgendered gainers can take away from the trans experience, that, we put so much emphasis on size being the priority, on masculinity being the priority in the community, but there is so much diversity to be had and to be seen and to be experienced. And when we make that the focus, we miss out on so much. We invalidate the experience of so many people. Not every gainer wants to get above 250. Not every gainer wants to be super big and super immobile. That's fine. We need to be willing to love on everyone's bodies, everyone's journey, any percentage of fat and body journey. We need to be willing to go there for everyone, because what the fuck is the point of this community if we can't show up for the fucking community? And to my mind, that's a good lesson for everyone to take away. It's a reminder. Sure, you don't have the body of someone who you might idolize. You don't have the same circumstances or opportunities as other folk, but that doesn't invalidate you. And the more that we as individuals lift each other up and choose to take the spotlight for ourselves and take center stage with different bodies, we then become the icons for other people who need to see themselves represented. So I just want to put that out there to everyone listening. And as a reminder, I said this at the beginning of the podcast, we're always looking for more people to speak on different subjects. Ray has made the point of saying that speaking to one trans person is one trans person's equivalent of the trans experience. This is not the end of that conversation for us. We're looking for trans feminine people. We're looking for people who are hypermasc, hyperfem. We're looking for people, and whether it's to speak specifically on the trans experience or just speak on anything, but people who happen to be trans, who have the opportunity to speak. We're looking for all those people to come and join us for this ride. So again, reach out to us. Let's make these conversations happen. And I just want to throw there, Ray, so you've kind of spoken a bit about how your weight gain journey influences your sense of masculinity in contrast to femininity and androgyny. Do you have any advice for trans gainers who whether it's on the masc or the femme side of things, do you have any advice on maybe little day-to-day things that they can start to incorporate that might help them to navigate that kind of dysmorphia and help them to feel a little bit more secured in their general day-to-day experiences?
Yeah, for sure. So I might back up a little bit and give a little bit more context about my full journey on
Please
how
do.
weight gain has influenced my masculinity. So to give a little bit of context, before I started transitioning, before I came out, weight gain was the farthest thing from my mind.
Right.
In fact, I struggled with an eating disorder for quite some time. I
Wow.
think that I was at the point of being underweight. I think my lowest weight was 125, and I'm 5'5" for context. So I was thin. I remember a point where I could like curl over and see my ribs,
Yeah.
you know, and I remember I did damage to some of my body because of it. I damaged my esophagus and my teeth as a result. Like trigger warning for people who are struggling with eating disorders out there, regardless of whether you're in the community or not. I think that I remember being chastised, for being overweight growing up. I was a bit of a chunky kid, especially when puberty hit. um I even remember having overweight family members make remarks on my body growing up. And growing up, I already had such this disdain for my body. So when puberty came around, it felt like just the biggest letdown ever. That gender fairy never showed up.
Right.
And I just felt, well, this is what it is. And I'm just SOL. I'm never going to have it. I'm just going to be stuck like this, and I wanted to have my body to change so badly, that, I hoped that the gender fairy would come and I could instantly become male. And then after puberty started, it was the worst confirmation I could have ever received of, nope, this is what it is. Then after puberty started, I started to gain weight pretty easily, and I became kind of involuntarily chubby, and I hated it because I was chubby and I looked female. Now, we already know about the double standard that exists for body image between men and women, let alone non-binary people, right? And being socialized and raised female and being overweight came with such a slew of issues and such a slew of struggles. That's when my eating disorder started. However, after going through therapy, after recovering from my eating disorder and getting back to a place where I have a better relationship with food, I got to a point where I began to feel comfortable. Then I explored my gender. I began to transition. And only when I felt at that level of comfort, I began to realize maybe being overweight is not a bad thing. Maybe it was just a negative association that I had instilled in me from when I was a kid. And that I can go on this journey of being fat and loving myself for being fat, and that it's okay. And, I think that if I wanted to pass along anything for other trans gainers out there, I would want to say that being trans and being a gainer is a journey of learning to love my body, warts and all, and come to a place of acceptance. I really love the serenity prayer that's said a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous, which says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there will be some things about my appearance that I can take control over and some that I can't. And, we can only look like ourselves. And even if somebody looks like a certain body type, I won't ever, look the same. Even if we are both trans masculine people who are the same height, the same weight, we won't look the same. And that's great. That's wonderful. We as a community need diversity. It is essential to showing people that we are inclusive and that we accept people for however fat they are or want to be.
I think every gainer can identify with that on some level. Like, there's things that I'll gripe about, like, oh, it's my belly's not fat looking enough. It's more bloated looking. It's more mpreg looking, or like
Your
I don't
cheeks
have
and
the kind
double
of love
chin, perhaps?
the double chin, which I'm still endeavoring to accept. But it's like I always say, we all want things that we don't have, and we just have to get. I'm still working on just getting comfortable with, like, this is just how I'm going to look, and I'm not going to have the same type of belly that someone else is going to have. The weight's not going to distribute in the same places as someone else, and there's nothing I can do about that. That is genetic luck of the draw, like James said. So, I mean, I can either sit around and lament the fact that I don't look like, say, someone that I see as like a gaining hero or something, or I can just think this is just me. And, I'm still working on it too. I feel like we all are on some level.
I definitely think so. And I think the point to diversity there is, like, ultimately, what is the benefit? If you only accept 2, maybe 3 archetypes total as the greatest paragons of existence, then the person who is going to be the greatest, there can only be 3 people out of 7 billion, 8 billion, how many of us now? Whereas when you look at diversity as the most important thing, you then recognize that there are 7 billion different ways, 8 billion different ways of being. And then everyone has the opportunity to be the best. And it actually doesn't detract from anyone else. It means that everyone's expression of gender, whether it's trans or cis, everyone's expression of size and weight, of race, every color, every height, everything, becomes not only valid, but the most important, the thing to be celebrated. So actually, it doesn't matter where you fall on any spectrum. When diversity is the intention, the success is in the rainbow expression of absolutely everything. And you probably find yourself in a position where you look around and you see how great things are, and then you go, we need more. We need more. We need more diversity. We need more of everything. We need more of every single person showing up and doing their best, because that's what's going to give us that most incredible patchwork of human beauty, So I love that, and I think that's such a very important point to come back to. We do have a listener question, if you're ready for it, Ray.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting into it. The question
totally.
The question is, how do you apply a trauma-informed approach to dialogue around gender and weight?
That's an excellent question. So for those of you who don't know what that is, trauma-informed, for a little bit of context, I operate in the civilian world as a therapist. And I work actually with a lot of transgender youth specifically. And trauma-informed care is a way of adopting an approach to healthcare, whether it's physical health, mental health, that creates a full picture of a person's life, past and present, to help engage the person more. It helps to understand the things that are barriers for them, the things that maybe they might have encountered in the past. Integrating knowledge about trauma into our policies and procedures, and actively working to avoid re-traumatization. So when you think about that approach and the way that we talk to people, I try very hard to maintain a very mindful approach when I'm talking to others. That's why I'm repeating a lot of times in this conversation my experience as a trans gainer. And this is only my slice of perception, because there are plenty of other people for whom that's not their reality. And that maybe certain things can be really upsetting to them. Maybe somebody else has also had a past with an eating disorder and they're still struggling with it. So, trauma informed means, hey, we're going to talk about this, and this might be upsetting, but I want you to know this so you can feel like you have the choice of being able to participate in this conversation. So with regard to weight gain and with regard to talking to others about that, I always like to be able to defer to the other person, hear from them what it is that they are comfortable with. And this kind of also ties in with, what is it like when you're talking with anyone who might not necessarily fit that cookie cutter mold? Defer to the other person, understand what their background is. Ask them questions, ask them, what do you feel comfortable with? It's just kind of like having a solid relationship, a friendship with somebody. Learn what they're okay with, learn with what they're not okay with. Adopt a mindset where we will not actively cause somebody to become hurt over something we might say on accident. Now, of course, we make mistakes. I will be the first one to admit that sometimes I say things out of turn and it can sometimes hurt people. And I admit that and I accept that. But just to be knowledgeable in that, I will make mistakes, but I want to make sure that my interaction with you is as positive as I can make it. So please let me know if I mess up, because I don't want for you to walk away from an interaction with me thinking that this person has hurt me and this person has made me feel small, because I never want anyone to feel that way.
It's beautiful, and to put Tim and I on the chopping block for that for a moment, I think that is something that we make a strong intention to do, but of course are not always successful with. And I think this is also an important thing to reflect on, because sometimes when it comes to the political awareness and the trying to be quote unquote woke about things, people try so hard to be perfect at every point on using the right pronouns and being inclusive and not using slur language, etc., etc. And inevitably, we fuck up, because we're very good at the moment about having this conversation about race, about systemic racism, and how we were all raised to be racist because of how systemic Western culture works. But not just race, but transphobic and fatphobic and ableist and all those other little things. It is impossible as a modern human to walk about in your day-to-day life as fully conscious and fully able to have every single conversation be problem-free. And sometimes I think we get very caught up in the whole, I made a mistake and I can never fix it again, or I made a mistake and I've broken that relationship forever. But there's that real importance in acknowledging your own faults and failings, which is where I do feel that as generalized humans, we all struggle with. We're all a little hesitant to put the hand up and say, I fucked up and I'm really sorry. And I think if we're willing to have that conversation, if we're willing to talk to our trans friends and say, I just want to apologize for, this situation that occurred, and even just the little apologies, isn't it? It's not always needing to make the big song and dance. In fact, sometimes the big song and dance is probably more a detraction than an inclusion. But something as simple as, if I were to refer to you as she and you go, pronouns are he, and I'm like, oh, sorry, he. And then we move on. And it doesn't need to be a huge issue. We can just nip it in the bud. It's the reminder. It just doesn't need to be a detraction. It doesn't need to be this fear that causes people to be hesitant to learn and to engage. And I do think that's where a number of people do get caught. Across varying minority struggles, people find themselves hesitant to put themselves in a position of needing to apologize should they make a mistake. That's more the observation there. Tim?
I was just going to say, I can admit that when I was younger, I didn't have a ton of exposure to, at least not that I was aware of, is the thing. It's like I'm finding out that plenty of people I've known in the community for years are trans, but I didn't know that at the time they weren't comfortable coming out about it. And I was insensitive. I didn't really understand the struggle. I didn't understand what their experiences were like until I started making friends with some trans people, and they explained to me what their journey has been like so far, and the kind of things that they've had to put up with and things they've had to go through. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that I was just, I guess, blithely unaware that this was happening in my own community. And then witnessing all of the the hate that they were getting, because that's still a blight on the gay community as a whole. Like, I've talked before about how gay men are always saying things like, oh, we have to keep fighting. The struggle's never over. We haven't won all of our rights yet. We can't leave anyone behind. And then on the other hand, like, they'll make fun of someone in a bar that they think doesn't, meet their visual approval. And it's like, how can you do that? Like, you can't do those two things at once. You can't be an advocate for change and then gatekeep, And I'm glad that I met the people that I now know, and I can understand what their struggle has been like. And yeah, so I mean, and sometimes it is just a lack of exposure. Some of it's willful ignorance, but sometimes it is a lack of exposure.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's all good. I was going to say, this kind of can tap into a greater conversation about cancel culture. That kind of leads to this thought that if we make a mistake, even if it's a big one, cancel culture says, you messed up and you're not redeemable, and I will never forgive you for this. And it never gives people that opportunity to make amends and to show that they can grow.
Thank you.
Not
Thank
everyone.
You for saying that.
We are not born woke. We are not born with all of this knowledge. We have to start somewhere. I have a saying that I really love that says, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And if we adhere to this cancel culture, no one will approach that. No one will adopt that. And regardless of where we're at, we need to be understanding of that. We're all human. We all fuck up. Let's just get past that. And
like I had said to James before, what happened to teachable moments?
Mm-hmm.
Where did that go? Why is that no longer a thing? Why is it just, oh, you made a mistake. I don't like what you said. I don't like what you did. I don't like what slogan you had on your t-shirt. The world's better off without you. Like, how do you jump from one extreme to the other? Like,
to my mind, it's an unwillingness to acknowledge the potential of someone's own flaws. What's that phrase when you're younger? Your parents turn to you because you say, oh, I hate so-and-so because he's such a bitch, or she's like this. And your parents say something to the effect of, the reason why you don't like that is because that's a quality that you know that you have. And instead of addressing it in yourself, you take it out on that other person. And I find myself having to challenge myself. If I come across someone or a situation that I do not like, is it because I see it in myself and I am not prepared to address that for my own growth and change? And I think the same thing, whether it's political, gendered, weight-wise, if I don't like something, why is it that I don't like it? And maybe taking an opportunity to be like, maybe that vitriol is something that I need to disseminate. Maybe I don't need to direct it at that person. Maybe I need to reframe it as an outward expression of an internal frustration. And maybe that internal frustration I need to address head on and discuss, what am I going to do about that? Is that something that is for me to change because it's a negative trait? Or is it a part of myself that I haven't come to accept? So I think that's a good challenge for everyone listening, no matter where you fall on any spectrum, in any minority group, remembering to allow for teachable moments with individuals, to give grace. And obviously, there is a massive difference between someone who is using the wrong pronoun from time to time and someone who is trying to outright run you off the road because you're transgender. There is a very clear distinction between an honest mistake and actual intent to kill. Sometimes we need to reframe how we perceive these transgressions and these moments against us, which is always a good reminder. And Ray, just to sort of close off here, What do you think as a community we can really learn from our trans members?
I think that, kind of like, I feel like a broken record a little bit, but, it always bears repeating that, every single non-cisgender person is completely valid, regardless of what they decide to do with their bodies or weight or anything. I would love to see more representation of bodies that don't conform to that mold of what we might expect to see for traditionally masculine overweight men. One thing that I would like to say is kind of like just something to bear in mind whenever we're talking to people, is just being aware of our use of language, and our use of communication. Sometimes we don't realize that what we're saying can be hurtful. So kind of taking a step back and thinking, how kind of taking like that trauma-informed approach, like how can I say something, or how can I ask a question respectfully and not hurt somebody? One thing that I hate is when people would say to me, "Oh, I never would have known that you used to be a girl," or "I never would have known that you were trans. I thought you were a real man." Never say that. That's incredibly offensive.
Talk about a backhanded compliment.
Those are what we would call microaggressions, which are kind of what those are, little things that will just kind of always little dig at you. And while maybe one might not hurt, if you get like those thrown at you all the time, that's going to add up, and that's going to add to a level of hurt and trauma to somebody's psyche. So something I always like to say is please communicate. If you're with just like with any person that you might want to have sex with or interact with in one way, ask what they are okay with. Ask what body parts they like to have touched or not touched. Ask what they like to call said body parts. How much they feel comfortable with wearing or not wearing. Asking about what they are okay with being called. I think I remember you guys kind of talking a little bit about like what your gainer pronouns are, in the same way, asking what our regular pronouns are, when referring to another person or referring to us as gainers within the community. Communication is key.
Yeah.
And it's sexy. Like, I can't think of another time when somebody is like, if somebody asks me, like, what would you like for me to call this? Or what, how would you like to be addressed as, like, heart eyes emoji happens. It's just like, oh, yes. It's such a great moment when somebody is like, your comfort and your, like, my respect for you is greater than my need to have an ejaculation. Like, chef's kiss. Love it. All about it.
Beautiful stuff. Well, Ray, I want to say a massive thank you for being here today and really just laying it all out there for the listeners. We really appreciate it. I just want to ask, where can people find you online?
So I am currently just on Instagram right now. My handle is translaardvark. I might get a Grommr. I'm not sure, but just sticking on Instagram for now. You can find me there.
That's a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. If you like this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. As always, you can find me on Instagram at stannnum.
And you can find me on Grommr as Orpheus. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThickyMouse. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fat.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it. Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and Vicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Body by Cream.